Hey, have you ever seen a headline screaming that the government is wasting billions while the country is drowning in debt? People panic, social media explodes, and everyone asks, how did we get here? But here is the reality almost no one talks about. Almost every country in the world carries debt. India, Germany, Switzerland, Qatar. Even the richest nations are in the red. Japan owes more than twice its entire economy. And the U.S.? A staggering $36 trillion. And that number keeps climbing. Sounds insane, right? So why does this happen? Why don't governments just print more money to cover their bills? Is having national debt really a disaster? Or is it just part of how countries manage money? Today, we re-unpacking it all in a way that actually makes sense. So by the end of this video, you'll understand debt like never before. If you've ever felt worried about your savings, frustrated by inflation, or confused about how governments even afford things like roads, hospitals, and stimulus packages, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around. What you're about to learn could completely change the way you see the economy. National debt, also called public debt, government debt, or sovereign debt, is just a fancy way of saying how much money the government owes. Think of it like a credit card bill for a country. When governments spend more than they earn in taxes, they borrow the difference. But unlike your personal loan, governments don't just borrow from one bank. They borrow from multiple sources: other countries, large financial institutions, and even their own citizens. Important distinction. When we talk about national debt, we only mean the central government's debt. So U.S. national debt doesn't include California or Texas. And it certainly doesn't include your personal loans or credit cards. In short, the national debt is the government's financial footprint. And understanding it is key to understanding how entire economies function. You might be thinking, why not just print money whenever there's a shortage? That sounds easy, right? Unfortunately, it's not. Printing money recklessly can trigger hyperinflation. Prices skyrocket, money loses value fast, and investors run for the exits. Just look at Venezuela or Zimbabwe, where money became almost worthless. Borrowing, on the other hand, forces discipline. You owe money and interest, so you have to spend carefully. Here's why countries borrow. First, to cover budget gaps. Governments mostly earn through taxes, but sometimes that's not enough. Imagine collecting $3 trillion in taxes, but needing $4 trillion to fund schools, hospitals, and social programs. That $1 trillion shortfall? Borrowing fills the gap without immediately cutting services or hiking taxes, which people would hate. Second, to invest in growth. Borrowing isn't inherently bad. Need new roads, schools, or hospitals? You can't wait years to save up. Borrowing lets you build now, helping people sooner and stimulating economic growth. That growth then generates more tax revenue, making it easier to repay the debt later. Third, to respond to crises. Sometimes borrowing isn't a choice. It's a necessity. Wars, natural disasters, or pandemics require quick action. In 2020, for example, the U.S. borrowed $3.8 trillion to fund COVID-19 relief. Without it, unemployment and economic collapse would have been far worse. Fourth, to refinance old debt. Countries often take new loans to pay off old ones. It's a cycle, and when managed carefully, it works. Mismanage it, however, and it spirals into crisis, as Sri Lanka experienced with its $51 billion default in 2022. Fifth, economic strategy. Debt can also be a way to control the economy. Issuing bonds can help reduce inflation or stimulate growth, depending on conditions. In other words, borrowing isn't always about running out of cash. it's also about strategy. When governments borrow billions or trillions, who actually lends it? Mostly three sources. First, domestic lenders. Citizens, banks, mutual funds, and government agencies can buy government bonds. They essentially lend money to the government in exchange for interest. For example, in March 2025, about $7.3 trillion, roughly 20% of the U.S. national debt, is held by government agencies like Social Security. Second, foreign lenders. Other countries, foreign banks, and even citizens can purchase government bonds. Japan and China are huge holders of U.S. debt, owning hundreds of billions each. Weaker economies struggle to attract foreign lenders, which is why international organizations like the World Bank provide low-interest loans for development projects. Third, central banks. Governments can, in theory, borrow from their own central bank. But direct borrowing risks inflation. Instead, central banks often buy government bonds indirectly to stabilize the economy. In desperate cases, countries turn to the IMF for emergency loans. But these come with strict conditions, like cutting spending or raising taxes, which can be politically and socially challenging. Debt isn't inherently bad. It can be good or bad depending on how it's used. Used wisely, it funds infrastructure, improves public services, stabilizes the economy during crises, and provides safe investment options for pensions. But mismanaged debt is dangerous. Spending on interest can outpace essential services. Investor confidence drops, credit ratings fall, and borrowing becomes expensive. Defaults can happen, as we saw with Sri Lanka in 2022. Economists often measure debt with the debt-to-GDP ratio, total debt compared to the size of the economy. Around 60% or below is generally considered safe. The U.S. has a debt ceiling, a legal limit on borrowing, but it's often raised to prevent default. The key is responsible management, not fear of debt itself. Technically, a country could be debt-free, but practically, almost no country is. Macau is sometimes cited as debt-free, but it's a small region with massive casino revenue. For most large nations, eliminating debt entirely isn't desirable. Debt supports infrastructure, stabilizes markets, and provides safe investments for retirement funds. Removing it could stunt growth, trigger protests, and destabilize financial systems. Debt is a double-edged sword. Used wisely, it enables growth and stability. Used recklessly, it can lead to crisis. So, the next time you see a headline shouting, "Government spends billions," remember, it's not always reckless. It's a calculated balance of borrowing, investing, and managing economic stability. High debt doesn't automatically spell disaster, and low debt isn't always a sign of safety. What matters is how it's handled. History shows debt can either be a tool or a trap. The difference comes down to planning, discipline, and understanding the system, not panic. If this breakdown helped you see the truth behind national debt, smash that like button, share this with a friend, and subscribe for insights you won't hear on mainstream media. Understanding debt isn't a tool just for economists. It's for anyone who cares about their money, their country, and the future.